5 hours before dawn, the Caspian Sea was silent, its dark waters calm, its horizon empty. To Moscow, it was the safest place on Earth, far beyond the reach of any Ukrainian weapon, but that illusion was about to shatter. From hidden launch sites deep inside Ukraine, 14 drones rose into the night, their engines barely whispering against the wind. Each carried a warhead equal to 40 kilograms of TNT and a single purpose: to strike a ship believed untouchable. Their target was Port Olia 4, a massive Russian cargo vessel reportedly loaded with Iranian-supplied Shahed drone components, the very drones that had rained destruction across Ukrainian cities. In the next few hours, that ship would vanish beneath the Caspian waves. 5 hours before the first explosion echoed across the Caspian, the mission had already been set in motion. Somewhere inside a reinforced operations room in Ukraine, a small group of analysts watched a ship that was never supposed to appear on their screens. It was a Russian-flagged cargo vessel named Port Olia 4, a 110-meter freighter anchored far from any front line in waters Moscow considered untouchable. Yet to Ukrainian intelligence, this ship had become the focus of a multi-layered, weeks-long surveillance effort, unlike any in the war so far. The story began quietly, not with explosions, but with data. Satellite constellations, both allied and commercial, had been tracking abnormal cargo movements between Iran's northern ports and Russia's Caspian coastline. Repeated manifests showed shipments of industrial components that, when cross-referenced with prior intelligence, matched the weight and packaging signatures of Shahed drone parts, airframe sections, navigation modules, and explosive payload housings. Each container represented a link in the supply chain behind the drones that had terrorized Ukrainian cities for months. To Kiev's planners, interrupting that chain was as valuable as striking a command center, and the Port Olia 4, with its holds packed with roughly 5,000 tons of Iranian-supplied material, offered a singular opportunity. The ship's location appeared to make it immune to attack. It had moored in the Volga-Caspian shipping canal, an inland stretch of water nearly 800 kilometers from the nearest Ukrainian position. Russian doctrine treated the Caspian as a sealed sanctuary, ringed by friendly or neutral states, shielded by geography, and overlooked by sparse radar coverage. The vessel's captain, confident in that safety, had chosen to anchor away from Olia's main harbor to avoid inspection or sabotage. In doing so, he unknowingly made himself a perfect, stationary target. Ukraine's intelligence network, rebuilt through necessity, fused data from multiple sources. Japanese synthetic aperture radar satellites, capable of seeing through clouds and darkness, first pinpointed the ship's silhouette. Analysts identified the unique shape of its cranes and anchor chain alignment, confirming its identity even with its transponder disabled. Each satellite pass layered more information: drift angles, anchorage duration, and tugboat traffic. From those patterns, the analysts inferred cargo offload schedules and communications windows. Next came signals intelligence. Russian maritime radios had gone silent, an intentional low-profile measure. But that silence spoke volumes. Electronic intelligence receivers detected background emissions, navigation radar bursts, control channel pings, and periodic GPS synchronizations. These faint signals helped confirm that the ship was running in dark mode, limiting external communication. To trained ears, it meant one thing: sensitive cargo on board. The operations concept began to take shape in late July. The mission directive was clear: disable, not detonate. The goal was to sink the Port Olia 4 in a controlled fashion, submerging the volatile load of explosives and drone components safely below the surface. Blowing it up outright risked secondary explosions and environmental fallout. Precision sinking would achieve both tactical and symbolic objectives. The planners assembled what they called a multi-axis single-wave strike, a simultaneous attack from several approach vectors designed to overwhelm defenses and ensure at least partial hull breach. The weapon of choice was the UJ-26ER unmanned aerial vehicle, a long-range kamikaze-style drone adapted from reconnaissance platforms. Built with lightweight composites and powered by fuel-efficient piston engines, It could fly more than 1,200 kilometers at altitudes low enough to evade radar detection. Each drone carried a 40-kilogram warhead, but their payloads were customized for the mission. Some fragmentation, others semi-penetrating or delayed fuse explosives. The idea was not to obliterate the target, but to cripple it, tearing open thin deck plates, rupturing ventilation shafts, fracturing beams, and puncturing waterline seams until the ship lost buoyancy. 14 drones were assigned in total, 12 attackers, and 2 communication relays. The relays would orbit high above the sea, linking the strike group back to Ukrainian controllers. The rest would fly low, skimming just above the waves in 4 groups. One axis targeted the stern and engine compartments, another aimed for the bow and bridge, a third focused on the midsection and cargo hatches, while the last pair served as diversions to deter rescue or interception. Planning consumed days of simulation. Engineers modeled radar reflection profiles and signal loss over the Caspian Basin. Meteorologists forecast wind shear and humidity that could interfere with GPS reception. Artificial intelligence algorithms optimized flight timing down to the minute. Everything, from the drone's takeoff sequence to their descent angles, was orchestrated for precision. When the final synchronization order was issued, there was no fanfare, no dramatic countdown. Just a calm voice over encrypted radio. Mission window open. Proceed. At 5:45 a.m., the first set of drones rose from hidden launchers in central Ukraine. From above, they would have appeared as faint streaks of silver against the dawn sky, if anyone had been looking. Flying at barely 60 meters above ground, they followed a programmed route that skirted radar stations and exploited terrain masking. Over the next 5 hours, they crossed rivers, deserts, and open water, each drone following an autonomous but coordinated path, guided by hybrid GNSS-INS navigation. To local radar operators along the Caspian coast, the incoming swarm was invisible. Their systems, tuned for larger, faster aircraft, filtered out the slow, low-flying objects as sea clutter. No alarms sounded, no defenses activated. The Port Olia 4 floated peacefully, unaware that the world's first long-range inland sea drone strike was minutes away. Inside Ukraine's control center, operators watched telemetry streams converge. Dots blinked in unison on a digital map, the telltale sign of perfect synchronization. The relay drones transmitted live positional data, while optical sensors confirmed the target's silhouette through low-resolution infrared feeds. In the command room, one analyst murmured the final verification.
What is that?
Visual on hull confirmed. Clearance granted. The atmosphere was tense but clinical. For months, Ukraine had endured waves of Shahed drones launched from Russian depots. Now, those same supply chains were being struck at their source. The irony was not lost on anyone in the room. As the drones approached, their systems automatically switched to terrain-following mode. The lead units began their attack run, each armed with distinct detonation patterns to maximize structural damage without igniting the explosive cargo. Flight recorders later revealed that the last transmission from the lead drone occurred just 30 seconds before impact, its onboard camera showing the gray outline of the Port Olia 4 growing larger by the frame. What followed was not chaos, but orchestration. In under 12 minutes, the sequence of detonations would cripple the vessel and change the perception of what unmanned warfare could achieve. But at this moment, suspended between silence and shock, the world still believed the Caspian Sea was safe. In the dim light of early morning, the operation's success would not yet be measured in explosions, but in what it revealed, that even the most hidden supply routes could no longer escape the reach of precision intelligence, evolving drones, and the determination of a nation fighting for survival. Ukraine had found its target in the shadows and prepared to strike where no one expected. At 5:45 a.m., from multiple hidden launch points scattered across central and southeastern Ukraine, the hum of 14 engines broke the silence. One by one, sleek composite-bodied drones accelerated into the sky, climbing low, steady, and almost invisible. There were no contrails, no radar spikes, no digital signatures betraying their flight. These were UJ-26ER long-range strike UAVs. Ukraine's latest adaptation of endurance platforms modified for deep penetration missions. They carried not just explosives, but the culmination of months of intelligence, engineering, and audacity. 2 of them flew higher than the rest, relay drones serving as the operation's lifeline. The remaining 12 hugged the terrain, sweeping just 20 to 60 meters above the ground and sea, weaving through invisible corridors mapped by satellite and signal models. Each craft knew its course by heart, guided by a hybrid GNSS-INS navigation system and stabilized by terrain-following sensors. Even if GPS jammers were activated, inertial guidance and optical confirmation would keep them on track. Their payloads were modest by traditional standards, 40-kilogram warheads, but precision turned modesty into lethality. Some were fragmentation charges designed to shred thin plating and create secondary fires. Others were semi-penetrating or delayed fuse bombs meant to crack bulkheads and rupture internal beams. Combined, the effect was surgical devastation. The strike package divided into 4 coordinated axes. Group 1 approached from the south-southwest, aiming for the engine room and stern ventilation shafts. Group 2 came from the northeast, targeting the bridge and forward quarters. Group 3 flew along the vessel's flank, focusing on mid-deck hatches and waterline plates. The last pair were diversions, ready to detonate in open water or near tugboats should rescue attempts begin. For 5 hours, the drones cruised steadily at 150-180 kilometers per hour, crossing hundreds of kilometers of terrain and open sea. They skimmed over reed beds, oil fields, and fishing zones, indistinguishable from radar clutter. The Caspian, normally serene, was now host to an invisible armada. In coastal radar stations, Russian operators noticed faint traces, low, erratic echoes that appeared and vanished among sea returns. Nothing seemed alarming. Fishing craft, perhaps migratory birds, maybe atmospheric interference. No intercepts were launched, no alerts sent. The complacency that had protected the Caspian for decades remained unbroken. At 10:25 a.m., the drone's relay signals merged into a tight communications window. Inside Ukraine's operations center, engineers and intelligence officers leaned forward, eyes fixed on telemetry screens glowing in the half-dark. The drones had reached attack range. The relay units, circling high above the horizon, locked their laser comm links, feeding final positional data to the strike group. At precisely 10:28 a.m. local time, the first drone struck. It dove steeply, accelerating during descent, and slammed into the aft ventilation shaft. The explosion ripped through cable trays and engine housings, severing power conduits and flooding the lower decks with smoke. Fire suppression lines ruptured, spraying mist into flames that hissed and grew instead of dying. 12 seconds later, a second impact rocked the starboard waterline. Steel plating buckled inward. Seawater rushed into the lower compartments. Pumps activated automatically, but electrical short circuits crippled half the systems within minutes. The ship's stern began to list. By 10:31, 3 more drones arrived in sequence. One detonated near the portside cargo hatch, tearing open the deck. Another struck the forward crane base, scattering molten debris across the bridge windows. The 5th drone hit the control room itself, smashing through the bridge canopy before detonating inside. The blast extinguished lights, shattered navigation panels, and silenced communications. In seconds, Port Olia 4 was blind. Crewmen scrambled amid smoke and alarms. The captain tried to reach the harbor authority, but found his radios dead. Emergency power flickered, then failed. With no propulsion, no steering, and rising floodwater, the ship was now adrift, a wounded giant sinking in slow motion. Ukrainian operators observed the impact pattern through telemetry and infrared feedback. Their goal was not destruction by fire, but structural collapse. The next set of drones adjusted trajectories automatically, exploiting new weaknesses. Between 10:33 and 10:36, 2 precision strikes hit the midship starboard section, enlarging waterline fractures. The ship's roll increased from 3 degrees to nearly 7 degrees. Internal bulkheads groaned under asymmetric pressure. Pumps could no longer keep pace. At 10:38, flames reached the main fuel lines. A low thud, more a sigh than an explosion, marked the rupture of the stern shaft tunnel. Diesel spilled beneath the deck, feeding orange pillars of flame that rose into the sky. The captain issued the final order: abandon ship. Lifeboats dropped into the sea as the crew scrambled away, leaving the freighter burning and tilting. Within minutes, the 6th and 7th drones struck near the stern's lower hull, hastening the flooding. 2 additional UAVs unleashed airburst explosives between the approaching tugboats, forcing them to retreat. A dense wall of smoke and shrapnel prevented any rescue. By 10:50, the vessel was mortally wounded. Its list exceeded 10 degrees, the engine room was submerged, and structural integrity was gone. As onboard munitions containers began to detonate sporadically from heat exposure, Ukrainian command transmitted the final code word: mission complete. Still, the assault had not ended. Relay drones loitered above, recording live footage and scanning for signs of movement. Within 2 hours, satellite imagery from Allied systems confirmed a wide plume of smoke extending 10 kilometers over the water. By 2:30 p.m., the port Olia 4 slipped beneath the surface, a 4,900-ton monument to precision warfare. Only the tips of cranes and debris fields marked its grave. For hours afterward, Russian coastal defense forces combed the area, recovering survivors and fragments. The official statement issued later that evening claimed minor deck damage due to an onboard fire. But open-source analysts were already piecing together the truth. Using landmarks from leaked photos, cranes, breakwaters, and dock pylons, investigators geolocated the wreck's resting point within the Volga-Caspian Canal. The evidence was irrefutable. The ship had sunk in relatively shallow water, its cargo unrecoverable. What followed was a wave of digital verification. Civilian SAR satellites captured heat residues. Optical images from August 14th showed dark water patterns and debris slicks. 5 days later, a second satellite pass revealed Russia's first failed attempt at salvage. Cranes and barges clustered around a spot now marked by a faint oil sheen. The scale of loss was immense. Each Shahed drone assembly weighed about 200 kilograms. With 5,000 tons aboard, Port Olia 4 carried components for hundreds. The cargo also included avionics modules, guidance gyros, and propulsion systems, the backbone of Russia's imported strike drone program. Yet, the true consequence went beyond tonnage. The sinking shattered the assumption that inland seas, once considered untouchable, could remain safe havens. The Caspian, long a symbol of distance and security, had become part of the active war zone. Ukraine's achievement was not only military, but psychological. It demonstrated how information dominance, the fusion of commercial satellites, advanced sensors, and autonomous drones could erase traditional borders. Geography no longer dictated safety. Distance no longer guaranteed protection. By the time smoke faded from the horizon, the Port Olia 4 was gone, and with it, a cornerstone of Russia's drone logistics chain. In its place floated a new reality, one in which technology, precision, and daring could overturn even the oldest military assumptions. The world had just witnessed something unprecedented, a long-range, trans-theater drone strike that rewrote the map of what was possible. And as Ukraine's drones returned home, or perished in the deep, one truth settled like the quiet over the sea. The Caspian would never again be a place of safety. By mid-afternoon, the calm surface of the Caspian Sea bore the faint traces of oil slicks and rising smoke. The ship that Russia had trusted to carry a vital lifeline of Iranian weapons technology was gone, resting on the seabed under 30 meters of water. Yet the physical loss of the Port Olia 4 was only the first ripple in a far wider storm. At first, Moscow's reaction followed a familiar pattern. Officials dismissed the reports as enemy propaganda, claiming that a minor fire had been contained without casualties. But within hours, photographs began circulating online. Images showed half-submerged cranes, floating debris, and the distinctive shape of the Port Olia 4's bridge protruding above the waves. Open-source investigators quickly matched those images with satellite coordinates. Even before Kyiv confirmed responsibility, the world already knew the truth. For Ukraine, the operation was not simply a tactical strike, it was a statement. The Caspian, once considered an inviolable rear area, had become a contested theater of war. By demonstrating reach and precision deep inside enemy-controlled waters, Ukraine had redefined what safe distance meant in modern warfare. The target's destruction was both practical and symbolic, a blow to Russia's supply lines and a warning to all who believed distance equaled security. The cost of the lost ship. When analysts began estimating the value of the cargo, the magnitude of the strike became clear. The port Olia 4 carried roughly 5,000 tons of Iranian-supplied equipment, drone fuselages, guidance systems, propulsion units, avionics, and boxes of 122mm rockets. The total value exceeded $500 million. Each Shahed drone kit weighed about 200 kilograms. The cargo contained parts for hundreds, possibly more than 800 units. In total, it represented the equivalent of several weeks of Russia's drone warfare capacity. Each of those Shaheds carried a warhead of about 40 kilograms, enough to level a city block or destroy a power substation. The Port Olia 4's loss therefore meant far more than numbers. It erased weeks of planned bombardments and severed the rhythm of nightly strikes on Ukrainian cities. Without avionics and power modules, Russian assembly lines could not meet their production schedules. Within 10 days of the sinking, Western intelligence agencies detected a measurable reduction in Shahed launch frequency. Nightly barrages that once came in waves of 30 to 40 drones dropped to less than half that number. Even the surviving stockpiles of completed drones faced delays as spare parts ran short. In Kyiv's eyes, this was not just a ship destroyed, it was a chain reaction. Insurance shock and maritime panic. The effects spread quickly beyond the battlefield. Global shipping insurers, already jittery after repeated attacks in the Black Sea, reacted instantly. War risk premiums for Caspian routes surged by more than 40% within a week. Several logistics companies suspended routes to northern Iran, while others switched to convoy formations that slowed port operations to a crawl. Automatic Identification System AIS transponders, the digital beacons that mark ships' identities, began to disappear from maritime networks as captains sailed dark. Some vessels changed call signs or falsified cargo data. Ports struggled with congestion as inspections increased. The Caspian, once a quiet inland sea of commerce, had turned into a zone of suspicion. Diplomatic channels also stirred. Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and Turkmenistan called for emergency maritime safety meetings, worried that the attack could destabilize the region's fragile balance. Though Ukraine emphasized that its target was strictly military, neighboring states understood the underlying message. The Caspian was no longer insulated from the consequences of the war. Intelligence dominance and strategic shock. To military observers, the Port Olia 4 operation illustrated a deeper truth, that Ukraine's strength lay not just in its weapons, but in its integration of intelligence, surveillance, and precision coordination. By combining commercial satellite data, open-source tracking, and signals intelligence, Ukrainian planners had executed an operation that rivaled superpower capabilities. The mission used over a dozen data streams, including Japanese synthetic aperture radar, European optical imagery, and internal sensor networks. It was a masterclass in what analysts now call fused domain warfare, the seamless blending of civilian technology and military strategy. For Russia, the shock was psychological. The Caspian, ringed entirely by Russia and its allies, had long been viewed as an untouchable sanctuary for logistics. Now that illusion was gone. Naval planners began reassessing base security from Makhachkala to Astrakhan. Defensive radars were repositioned, electronic warfare systems recalibrated, and patrol routes expanded. Yet these reactions came too late to protect the Port Olia 4 and too early to restore confidence. Russian social media channels flooded with speculation. If Ukraine could reach the Caspian, what else could it strike next? Oil terminals, radar stations? Even the question itself was a victory for Kyiv, a psychological strike that forced its opponent to imagine the impossible. The ripple beyond the sea. International analysts soon compared the Port Olia 4 strike to historic turning points in naval warfare. like Britain's use of midget submarines in World War II or Israel's early drone operations in the 1980s. Each had expanded the definition of reach, showing that asymmetry and innovation could rewrite the rules. This operation also revealed how non-traditional warfare had matured. In place of fleets and bombers, Ukraine wielded a constellation of drones and algorithms. It was a demonstration of efficiency over excess, precision over brute force. In the days that followed, Russian repair yards attempted a partial salvage. Cranes and barges were deployed, but underwater imagery confirmed that most of the cargo had disintegrated or been rendered unusable. The cost of recovery outweighed the potential gain. By late August, salvage operations were quietly abandoned. Meanwhile, within Ukraine, the success fed a different kind of momentum. Defense engineers studied the telemetry to refine future missions. Lessons learned from the Caspian strike would feed into new programs for extended-range drones and stealthy autonomous systems. The message to domestic and foreign audiences alike was clear. Innovation could overcome disparity. Modern war without borders, the strike also served as a warning for the wider world. It underscored how conflicts in the 21st century are no longer contained by geography. Inland seas, deserts, and mountain borders, once reliable buffers, now mean little against networked intelligence and unmanned systems. For defense planners globally, the Caspian operation became a case study in vulnerability. Ports began reviewing their security zones, coastal radars recalibrated to detect small, slow targets. Civilian satellite providers saw new demand for real-time monitoring, blurring the line between commercial technology and defense infrastructure. In many ways, Port Olia 4 marked the dawn of a new doctrine, horizontal escalation through precision autonomy. Instead of matching the enemy ship for ship, Ukraine had struck through reach, data, and timing. The result was the same as a missile barrage, achieved at a fraction of the cost, a new balance of fear. By September, the Caspian had changed. Cargo ships sailed in convoys. Military escorts became common even in civilian harbors. AIS silence was now the rule, not the exception. Every unidentified radar blip drew suspicion. But perhaps the most profound consequence was invisible: the erosion of certainty. Russian commanders, once assured of their deep rear security, now faced the constant possibility of unseen drones beyond the horizon. For Ukraine, that uncertainty was the real victory. The sinking of the Port Olia 4 was not just about destroying a vessel or halting drone supplies. It was about altering the psychological landscape of the war, showing that no fortress, no sea, and no distance could offer complete protection. In that sense, the Caspian strike was both message and milestone. The moment a smaller nation, through intelligence, courage, and precision, forced a larger power to look over its shoulder. The sea had swallowed a ship, but it had also swallowed an illusion. And from that moment on, every vessel bound for Russia sailed beneath a new shadow, the awareness that somewhere, unseen, the next swarm might already be on its way. The sinking of the Port Olia 4 was more than the destruction of a ship. It was the rewriting of a battlefield map. In one strike, Ukraine turned the Caspian Sea from a symbol of safety into a reminder that no distance can guarantee immunity in the age of precision warfare. What began as a quiet launch of 14 drones ended as a seismic demonstration of how intelligence, innovation, and courage can overcome geography and scale. This operation proved that modern conflict is no longer defined by borders or tonnage. It is fought through information, through data that sees beyond clouds, through machines that think faster than defenses can react. Ukraine's planners didn't just sink a vessel, they exposed the illusion of invulnerability that has shielded rear areas for generations. For Russia, it was a logistical setback and a psychological reckoning. For the world, it was a glimpse into the future, a future where technology, adaptability, and precision decide victory more than size or numbers. The lesson of Port Olia 4 is clear. Wars are no longer won by distance, but by insight, innovation, and resolve. If you want to stay informed about every strategic breakthrough, Every shift in military technology and every operation shaping the future of warfare, subscribe to Military Worldline News. Join us for deep analysis, verified updates, and the stories behind the battles that define our time. Knowledge is the new defense, and staying informed is the strongest armor of all.